Okay, networkers, let's continue with the Spotlight Tonight show from the Great Discovery AI Supercampus with another spotlight about how ChatGPT networking is the cure for loneliness. Now, this is a quick spotlight. Usually they run about 5 to 6 minutes. And then right to the right, you can find the full podcast episode. And those usually run around 20 minutes. So this is all about saving you time to help you make more money and grow the Great Discovery at the same time.
All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about something that feels like an emotion, but is actually a major health risk, especially once you're over 50. I'm talking about loneliness. But we're not just going to dwell on the problem. We're going to explore some really surprising new solutions. So let's get right into it. I want to start with a question for you. What daily habit do you think is as bad for your long-term health as smoking 15 cigarettes every single day? Just take a second to think about that. Is it a terrible diet, not exercising? Well, the answer might actually shock you. Yeah, you heard that right. It's chronic loneliness. And look, that is not an exaggeration. That comparison comes straight from major scientific studies, and it's even been highlighted by the US Surgeon General. The physical health risk of being socially disconnected is literally on par with one of the biggest public health dangers we've ever known. So this really forces us to reframe how we think about loneliness. This isn't some kind of personal failing or something to be ashamed of. It is a verifiable public health crisis, and it has measurable risks that we have to start taking seriously. Now, it's really important to understand a key distinction researchers make. On one hand, you have social isolation. That's the objective fact. You just don't have a lot of social contact. It's something you can measure. But then there's loneliness. That's the subjective feeling of being disconnected. You can be in a room full of people and feel completely and utterly alone. It's about that painful gap between the connection you want and the connection you actually have. Okay, so you might be wondering, how do we know the risks are that bad? Well, this isn't just guesswork. A huge study in 2023, a meta-analysis, looked at data from over 2 million adults. The sheer scale of this gives us some incredibly clear and honestly startling insights into the real-world consequences. And here's what they found. Social isolation, that objective lack of contact, is associated with a staggering 32% increased risk of death from all causes. That is a massive independent risk factor, right up there with the big ones we all know about. And what about that subjective feeling we talked about? Well, loneliness itself was linked to a 14% increased risk of death. So here's the key takeaway. It doesn't matter if it's the objective reality of being alone or the internal feeling of being disconnected. Both are serious, tangible threats to our health. Which, brings up a massive question. How? How can a feeling have such a huge physical impact on our bodies? Well, the answer is pretty fascinating, and it lies deep in our basic biology, in our ancient threat detection systems. See, from an evolutionary perspective, being alone meant you were vulnerable to predators. It was dangerous. So when your brain perceives you're isolated, it sounds the alarm. It triggers that classic fight-or-flight response, flooding your system with stress hormones like cortisol. Now, if this only happens once in a while, it's fine. But when loneliness is chronic, your body never gets the all-clear signal. It's stuck in high alert mode, which leads to chronic inflammation, a weaker immune system, and it literally accelerates the aging process. Okay, so let's zoom in a bit. Why is this issue particularly tough for people over 50? Well, it turns out this stage of life often comes with what you could call a double whammy of social changes that can make us way more vulnerable. And here is that midlife squeeze. First, the automatic structures that gave us easy daily connection, like going to work every day or having kids at home, they start to disappear. Think retirement or an empty nest. At the exact same time, it suddenly takes more proactive energy to build new connections. And then, the final blow. There's this internal barrier. A lot of people feel shame or stigma around admitting they're lonely, which just makes them isolate even more. It's a tough cycle. All right, so we've definitely laid out the problem. It's serious. But here's where we pivot. What's the solution? This is where things get really interesting. Because instead of blaming technology for making us more isolated, we can actually flip the script and see it as a powerful new tool for connection. So let's talk about this idea of AI hospitality. And no, this is not about having a robot for a friend, not at all. It's about using tools like ChatGPT to help us overcome those little barriers to reaching out. That awkwardness or not knowing what to say? For example, you could ask it to help you write a warm, thoughtful, non-weird message to an old friend you haven't spoken to in 5 years. It's like having an assistant whose only job is to help you connect with real people. So how do we put all of this into practice? The big shift is we have to stop waiting around for connection to just happen to us. We need to start treating it like a form of exercise. It's time to build your own social fitness plan. And this is the absolute core of the new mindset. Connection isn't some prize you win. It's a muscle that you build. And just thinking about it that way takes so much pressure off, right? You don't need every single social interaction to be this huge, life-changing event. You just need consistent, gentle effort. So the internal work, your mental workout, it starts right here. First, reframe the whole thing as fitness. Second, start leveraging what are called micro-moments. These are the small, frequent doses of warmth, a genuine thank you to the cashier, a quick text to a friend. These little things add up way more than a few big gestures a year. And third, and this is a big one, you have to actively fight back against that inner critic, that little voice that tells you you're a burden or that nobody wants to hear from you. Okay, that's the internal stuff. Now what about the external plan? 3 key actions. First, prioritize quality over quantity. Aim for 1 or 2 really deep, trustworthy connections rather than a dozen superficial ones. Second, build new scaffolding. That just means joining a club, a volunteer group, something based on a genuine interest of yours. It provides a new automatic structure for social contact. And finally, work to repair and strengthen the bonds you already have. And this is how we bring it all together. Use your technology wisely and intentionally. For that high warmth outreach we talked about, not for mindless scrolling. Integrate movement to get what you might call a social multivitamin. Find a walking buddy, join a fitness class. And finally, take an honest look at your environment. Does your daily life have connection deserts, long stretches with no human interaction? If so, you have to actively find ways to fix that. Now, I know this might sound like a lot to take in, but the most important thing to remember is that it is never, ever too late to start, and that first step can be ridiculously small. Look, don't try to completely transform your social life by next week. That's not the goal. The goal is gentle, steady persistence. So just choose one person and one tiny active outreach this week. That's it. That's the beginning. In fact, one of the easiest, lowest pressure ways to do this, to perform a little act of hospitality, is just to share something valuable. Sharing a helpful resource like this very explainer is a perfect micro moment of connection. And here's why that works so well. It's an icebreaker that immediately gets past all the boring small talk. You're not just saying, "Hey, how are you?" You're saying, "Hey, I was thinking about you, and I thought this might be interesting or helpful." You're offering value right from the start, and that is such a powerful foundation for a real conversation. So we'll leave you with this one last crucial question. This isn't about theory anymore. It's about action. Who is the one person you will reach out to this week with just one small act of hospitality? Your social fitness plan starts right now.